Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to continue to look at the fossil record as evidence of evolution, and hopefully you did all your preliminary assignments so you'll be able to follow right along. Also, I hope you have your lecture guide printed out because it'll be easier to take notes if you have that right in front of you. All right, here we go. To review again, I'd like to reiterate important points. The theory of evolution states that all life on Earth descended from a common ancestor, and a sort of a corollary of this theory is that life originated as a simple form and became more complex and diverse over time. And to review, the fossil record is almost a 4 billion year old record of how life has changed on our planet over time. So, there are actually 4 different ways that the fossil record supports the theory of evolution. There's actually 4 different lines of supporting evidence, and they are as follows, and these are right on your lecture guide so you don't have to frantically copy them down. The pattern of fossils all over the Earth clearly supplies strong supporting evidence that life has changed throughout time and in the pattern of overall simpler life forms over time evolving to becoming more and more complex and diverse. It shows evidence that one type of animal has changed throughout the years, and it shows evidence of transition species, one type of organisms changing into a totally new and different type. And finally, the fossil record shows us a very sobering thought that 99% of all life that has ever existed on our planet has gone extinct. So the world that we the world that we see today is not the world that has always existed throughout time on our planet. So we're going to go over these 4 lines of evidence one at a time. So let's look at the first one. Life originated in simple form and became more complex and diverse with time. So here you need to get out your homework assignment and where you've looked up dates in the fossil record. So let's take one example of eukaryotic versus prokaryotic cells. What do you have the date for the oldest fossils that we've found of prokaryotic cells? So hopefully you found somewhere in the area of 3.5 billion years old or 3.8 billion year old fossils. All right, so according to the fossil record, the first life that appeared on planet Earth was prokaryotic, and it appeared about 3.5 or 3.8 billion years ago, somewhere in that range. And then for well over 1.5 billion years, almost 2 billion years, life was totally single-celled and prokaryotic. It's not until we get to rock roughly 2 billion years old that we find the first evidence of eukaryotic cells. And so, does this support the idea of life becoming more and more complex over time? Well, from Bio 151, you should know which is more complex, a eukaryotic cell or a prokaryotic cell. Hopefully you're thinking eukaryotic cell. It's more complex in many different ways. It has a nucleus, the DNA is right in a nucleus. It has lots of organelles, they're usually bigger. So, it took over 1.5 billion years, almost 2 billion years, from life forms to evolve from simple one-celled organisms to more complex one-celled organisms called eukaryotic cells. And then what do you have for the earliest date of multicellularity, where an organism is actually made out of more than one cells? Now, it's sort of weird. I've read ranges from 600 million years, which is what you might have written down, to 1.3 billion years. So I like round numbers. Let's just say, pick an average number and say multicellular life forms did not appear on our planet till about 1 billion years ago. All right, so what I need you to do is look at a different trend, like maybe in the plant kingdom and maybe in the animal kingdom. And I want you to post it in the chat room saying that according to the fossil record, this trend that we find in the plant kingdom, blah, 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 and explain in a sentence or two how a trend in the plant kingdom or in the animal kingdom showed that life was becoming more complex over time, the overall pattern. And I like to train you the way I'm going to test you. So after you post your comments in the chat room, I'll be able to comment on it, and that way you'll get an idea what I expect from you on your first quiz and then on your test. All right, moving right along. The fossil record shows us that organisms have changed over time. So you watch that video. What type of organism did you see changing over time in that cliff? Do you remember? Sea urchin. Do you remember the sea urchin? So it started off more rounder and then it became a little bit more heart-shaped. So here clearly in that same exact geographical area, we saw that one type of organism, that sea urchin, changing slowly, gradually over time. Do you remember another example from the video? Maybe a more fun example? Are you thinking horse evolution? Good. Now, I'll give you a little heads up on your first quiz and on your test. You're going to have to write in detail about a transition fossil or a series of transition fossils. You don't have to know them all in gory detail. Just pick one that you want to be the expert on. So maybe horses is something you really like, and this might be the one you decide that you're going to become the expert on. So what do you remember seeing in the video? Hopefully you remember seeing that the horse ancestors, we can't call it a horse. It used to be called hippocampus. Now I usually see this word Hyracotherium. Boy, I'm stumbling all over that today. All right, this was smaller, and hopefully you saw from the video it had 4 toes in front and 3 toes in back. And this little guy, and it was smaller in size, existed about 50 million years ago. And then through time, if you were looking at just the front leg of the horse, it went from having 4 toes to 3 toes, to 3 toes where 2 were sort of not in use, to so mainly running on 1 toe, and then 1 toe with, these don't really show it, just vestigial little toes on the side. Right, so here's some artist rendition. We see how horse changed over time. It grew bigger, or the horse ancestors up into the modern horse. The number of toes changed, primarily because the environment was changing. You can't really gallop in a woodland, but as the environment changed and the horse was on grass, it made much more sense to develop adaptations to gallop. So this was what we call selected for. And again, this happened over from about 55 million years ago to the modern horse Equus arose just about 4 million years ago. Now, what I don't like about this picture, it looks like it's linear, that this horse evolved into this and this and this, and it was straight line evolution. If you look at the diagram that's also in your book, all right, from this original hippocampus, there were many lineages, and most of them became extinct. So not all the fossils that we find, like Pleohippus, are on the direct line to Equus. So Pleohippus, even though it was a relative of the modern horses, was not an ancestor, right? This would be like fifth cousin once removed or something like that. We believe some of these horses are direct ancestors of the modern horse, but not all. So evolution has this branching pattern. So again, this might be something that you might want to write about. But again, the fossil record is pretty impressive, showing one type of animal changing into a different type of animal over time. This little horse-like mammal gradually evolved, its descendants, some of its descendants, evolved into the modern horse. And I like this picture, an artist's rendition of modern horse Equus meeting its ancient horse-like ancestor. All right, what does the fossil record tell us? Here is a criticism somebody made once of the theory of evolution. The problem with the theory of evolution is the conspicuous lack of transition fossils. Is this true? Because let's think about it. It's one thing for one sea urchin to change into another type of sea urchin, or one horse-like mammal to change into another horse-like mammal. But if evolution is true, if all life descended from a single common ancestor, that means somewhere along the line, one animal had to change into a completely different type of animal. It might surprise you who made this statement. It was Charles Darwin. And he said this when he published his groundbreaking book on evolution, On the Origin of Species. So this is one thing that puzzled Charles Darwin, is why weren't there these transition fossils found in the fossil record? Well, the answer was because paleontology was still pretty young. And here's an ironic fact. The same year that Charles Darwin published his theory, this fossil was found in the fossil record, Archaeopteryx. If you've ever had a geology course, maybe you've heard of it before. When scientists found this, they saw this imprint of these bones and thought it was the perfect little preserved imprint of a dinosaur skeleton. And they had found a similar one just like this, but There's one difference with Archaeopteryx. Can you see what this is imprinted in the rock next to the bones? If you're thinking feathers, you are absolutely correct. So here is an here is an artist's rendition of Archaeopteryx. Now let's put this into a little context for you. Maybe in grade school or high school you learned there were 5 different types of animals. Well, if you learned that, what your teacher meant to say there's 5 different types of animals with bones. Now the first of these to arise on our planet, should not surprise you that much, were fish. I mean all life. The oceans were the cradle of life. All life appeared originally in the oceans. So there are many, many lineages of fish today. These are supposed to be lineages because fish have been evolving the longest. Some fish stayed fish, but what we'll learn about in Unit 3 that one lineage of fish called the lobe-finned fish evolved into amphibians. I mean, if you think about your little goldfish and those wimpy little fins it has, they could never walk on land. But this lineage of lobe-finned fish evolved into amphibians. Now, some amphibians, of course, stayed amphibians, right? We have lineages of amphibians. But one group of vertebrate animals, animals with bones, became completely adapted to life on land, and those would be the reptiles. Amphibians still need to hang out near a body of water in order to reproduce, in order to breathe even, but not reptiles. They do not need to be around any body of water to reproduce or to breathe. Now some reptiles, now what I'm teaching is a little bit heresy and I'll tell you why in a minute. So some reptiles stayed reptiles, but some reptiles evolved into birds. In fact, we do not really believe all the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. We think that birds are actually the direct descendants of dinosaurs, and some reptiles evolved into mammals. So, what we have here, Archaeopteryx, is showing a true transition between reptiles and birds. Look at its beak. Do you know any birds today with teeth? No. So this is reptilian in nature. Do you know any birds today with claws coming out of their wings? No. And if you look at the skeleton, it had a bony tail. If you've ever had a pet parakeet, it does not have a bony tail. Does not whatever. All right. So this clearly shows animals having reptilian characteristics, also gaining avian or bird-like characteristics. We don't think the descendants of Archaeopteryx are alive today. We don't think this was a direct ancestor of birds, but it's definitely showing you what some reptiles were doing at the time, how they were transitioning. And what we'll emphasize in Unit 3, scientists don't even call birds a distinct unit anymore. The latest trend now in science is to say birds are simply highly specialized reptiles. There's reptiles and more reptiles. So that's Archaeopteryx, found the exact same year that Charles Darwin published his theory of evolution. All right. Your book goes into detail, which I'm not going into, but there are clear differences between reptilian skulls and mammal skulls. And so not only have we found transition fossils here, showing the movement from non-avian reptiles into birds, but we have now, since the time of Charles Darwin, found thousands and thousands of skulls that are transitional between reptiles and mammals. I'm not going to go into all those little details. And then, maybe the coolest thing ever is what you saw the PBS video snippet on, whale transition fossils. And Charles Darwin called this one. Again, reptiles were the first group of vertebrates to be totally adapted to terrestrial life, life on land. They didn't need to be around the body of water at all. And we know mammals evolved from reptiles. So mammals, too, are totally adapted to life on land. We do not need a body of water to reproduce in. We don't need a body of water in order to breathe. However, dolphins and whales are mammals. And so Charles Darwin hypothesized that some of these land mammals had to evolve back into the sea, back into the water. And he predicted we would find transition organisms showing a four-legged mammal gradually losing its hind legs and evolving into dolphins and whales. And that, if you watch the video, is exactly what we have found. Coolest thing ever, I think. So again, I'm not going to talk a lot about the evolution of mammals from reptiles and all the different changes in the skull. If you take a comparative anatomy course, you can study that in more detail. However, maybe you want your area of expertise to be whale evolution. And if so, you can read that part of your textbook with more attention and become a little expert. But just to show you some things that we've found. All right. Pachycetus was a mammal that lived 50 million years ago, and it was just becoming adapted to aquatic life. Remember in the video it talked about whales evolving from a wolf-like mammal? Well, where are the nostrils on a wolf or in your pet dog? The nostrils are on the tip of the nose. All right, that's how the dog breathes. What if you look at a beluga whale? Where are its nostrils? Its nostrils are on top of its head. That's an adaptation of whales and dolphins for their nostril to be on top of their head. We call it the blowhole. So, drum roll, we found a whole series of transition fossils for whale evolution, but let's look at a fossil exactly halfway between Pachycetus and today's beluga whale. This transition fossil, Adiocetus, 25 million years ago, look at this, the nostrils halfway up from the nose to the skull. Is that cool or what? So if you would talk about whale transition, you would not only talk about movement of the nostril, you would talk about how the limbs adapted from purely terrestrial life to aquatic life. All right, and drum roll, please. This was just discovered, this transition fossil, look at this, was discovered less than 10 years ago. The Tiktaalik. So what are we talking about here? Well, I just sort of messed that up, but here I'm going to get back fast. So I want to go to my little drawing. We knew there had to be a transition fossil here between fish and amphibians. We knew it had to exist, right? We knew the approximate age of the fossil, and we knew the environment. And so because we knew the age and the environment, we knew where to look. And in Canada, actually, we found fossils of the right habitat of the right age. And so just recently, in 2006, we found it, the Tiktaalik, this transition between a lobed fin fish and an amphibian. All right. So again, it's just an amazing area that we are still finding fossils today. All right, and again, the last sobering thought is the fossil record is very clear that 99% of all organisms which have ever existed are now extinct. And this is a really sobering thought, again, that you look out at the world that you see today, and that is not the world that has always existed. If you've done your homework, look at the fossil record. Life did not start crawling up on land until 500 million years ago. So life on our planet is about 3.5 billion years old. And for 3 billion years, all life was solely aquatic. Again, the world that we see today is not the world that has existed through time. If you've been working on your study guide, you'll see there's been 5 major extinctions in the natural history of life on our planet. And unfortunately, scientists are telling us we're in the 6th major extinction period. And unfortunately, that's due to human activity, which is another sobering thought, because people say, oh, we don't care if this flower or if this snail or this whatever toadstool or little squirrel goes extinct. But look at the last extinction 65 million years ago. Which animals went extinct? The simpler ones or the more complex ones? Well, it was clearly the dinosaurs, the more complex ones. There were millions and millions of species dominating the earth. But you see, more complex life forms owe their existence to simpler life forms. So if you know somebody who's sort of casual about the extinction of lots of species on our planet, that might be something to think about, because we are the most complex life forms on our planet. But that's taking us to the last unit of the course. I hope you enjoyed this, and we will have more assignments to follow. We'll see you in the next month.